Welcome to Social Aloe Ministries, where we set the captives free. I was actually getting ready to record a message the Lord gave to me yesterday. In a sense, I interrupt that broadcast to present this message that I just received. And it relates to countries all over the world. Today's towards the end of August 2020, and it's a year when many people are going to the polls to elect officials to lead their countries. And many people have flowery words to say. But how many of you have been burned in a relationship? Or what could be described more accurately as being a situationship, where you may have thought it was a relationship, but a person was simply using you to get something. And a person would say whatsoever was necessary, and would even do certain things, whatsoever was necessary in order to get you into that position, to get from you what he or she wanted. And yes, women do that too. And then once you gave the person what he or she wanted, once the person had enough, then the person just cast you away. And oftentimes elected officials do that. When they're trying to get into office, they'll tell you what's what you want to know, what's what you want to hear. But when they get in power, they do something the total opposite. And one of the things they'll do is to be like an Absalom. And a part of this message is not to necessarily tell you, for example, which party to vote for, but to ensure that you get the Lord's counsel regarding who is actually speaking for him, regarding who is his anointed for the season you're in, so that you do not get swept away. In colloquial terms, so you don't get played. And an example of that is 2 Samuel 15. Start verse 1. Now it came about after this that Absalom provided for himself a chariot and horses and 50 men as runners before him. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate, and when any man had a suit to come to the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And he would say, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but no man listens to you on the part of the king." Now Absalom was a king's son. The king was David, the Lord's anointed, the one the Lord had put in a position. Now this was after 2 Samuel 12, when David was actually under judgment, but David was still the king. But then here it is, Absalom getting up early, so making it seem as if he's a hard worker, being attentive to the people, making it seem as if, well, the king isn't listening to you, but I'm listening to you. The king doesn't care about you, but I care about you. Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, the one would appoint me judge in the land, then every man who has any suit or cause could come to me, and I would give him justice." So here it is, Absalom getting up early in the morning, presenting himself to be a better alternative, a better choice than the king, the one the Lord had put in that position. And when a man came near to prostrate himself before him, he would put out his hand, and take hold of him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom dealt with all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So they came to the king, but here it is, the king's son, making himself to be more attentive than the king, to be better than the king. See, with David, the Lord called David a man after his own heart. David was a man after God's heart. Even though he messed up, he was still a man after God's heart. You don't hear the Lord calling Absalom a man after his heart. But Absalom was making himself to be better than David. He was presenting himself as such. So Absalom stole away the hearts of the men of Israel. He stole their hearts. Well, shortly after this, Absalom rose up He had the power base that he needed. He had the rebellion that he needed. And the king went into exile to save his life. And let you know how badly things start for Absalom. One of the first things that he did, he took 10 of his father's concubines and he slept with them out in public. Now that was a judgment of God on David. But that was an abomination in the Lord's sight for him to sleep with his father's concubine. It was against the law for him to do that. So whereas David took another man's wife, by him taking his father's 10 concubines, you could say it's 10 times worse than what David did. But initially, he presented himself like a better alternative. So before you listen to speeches, smooth words from whosoever, ensure you're getting the Lord's point of view. Because sometimes his point of view may surprise you. The person who's in that you're trying to get rid of, maybe the person the Lord wants you to keep in. And the person who's in that you want to keep in, maybe the person the Lord is telling you to get out, to drive the person out. But you need the Lord's counsel. Not what people are telling you about others. Especially if the person who's speaking about someone else is trying to get the person out of power. You have to be careful. Do not be deceived by smooth speeches. Absalom, getting up early, seemingly working hard for the people. And shortly after taking power, the power that he worked so hard to get, he slept with 10 of his father's concubines out in public for all Israel to see. And if you've ever been played in a relationship, in a situationship, you know what that is like. Smooth speeches. And by the way, some people have been played in a really bad way. And by that I mean, you had a choice between two people. One may have been the person God had for you. But someone with smooth speech maybe even looked better. Because one of the things with the story that I didn't cover, Absalom was the most handsome man in Israel. So you may have had a choice between someone the Lord chose for you versus someone else. And you got deceived because maybe the person looked more physically attractive. You weren't seeing the person through the Lord's eyes. In 1 Samuel 16, the Lord spoke about David's brothers when Samuel was there to choose the Lord's anointed. Samuel saw Eliab, David's eldest brother, tall, good looking, and he's thinking, this is surely the Lord's anointed. And Lord let him know he doesn't look at people based on their external characteristics. 1 Samuel 16 also let us know that David was a handsome man, but it wasn't simply about looks. David was a man after the Lord's heart. Eliab, Shema, David's other brothers, they weren't like that. So do not be deceived based on what you see, what you hear, because it appeals to your flesh. It appeals to your carnality. It appeals to maybe your ideology. You need the counsel of God. And by that, I don't mean going to see other people. I mean speaking to God directly. What is your will in this situation? Do I want Jacinda Ardern to rule for a little bit longer? Do I want Andrew Holness to rule for a little bit longer? Do I want Donald Trump to rule for a little bit longer? And it goes down the line. Whichever country you're in. Ensure you have the Lord's mind regarding who to choose. Do not get deceived by an Absalom. And by the way, Absalom's reign was short-lived. He ended up dying a violent death. So please, seek the Lord, even in your voting. He exalts kings and he takes them down. But like in a society where voting is required, please, before you vote, get the Lord's will. God bless you. Jesus is Lord.